Welcome back to 23 Minute Reads with me, Maya D. This is kind of like my accountability vlog because in these short videos, I share with you my takeaways from my current reading. Right now, that is Dance and Belonging. And this is book 11 of my 23 to 23 challenge, where I'm reading 23 minutes per day, every day, as an action of self-love, as an investment into myself, and as a way of providing myself with some consistency in an ever-changing world. Hoping that you are getting something from these videos that I'm sharing, and hoping that you'll also drop some comments down there in that comment section below so there's an actual dialogue going on. Having in mind that while I have several decades of experience as a dancer, an educator, and a curriculum writer, I am not the know-all be-all for this book. I'm simply providing a space for dialogue. Well, this week I read pages 97 through 120, and here are my 3 takeaways. Takeaway number 1 is student innovation. Chapter 4, Bias and Behaviors, has a section on creative process and performance. Let me try it again. The section is called Creative and Performance Process Courses. And this reminded me of something that I said in the last video, which is replication is different from creation. Here's a quote from the book, and I quote, I don't know if you have to pair those together, but here's a quote. When educators require students to explore the creative process attuned to only the aesthetic choices of the instructor, they essentially mold students' sensibilities to the standards established by the instructor. In this way, the creative process becomes a replication of existing systems rather than wholly unique. End quote. In that previous video, I mentioned examining my own rubrics and taking a deeper look at how I was defining that A, like what is A work? And at that moment of reflection, I realized that it was mainly consistent with following my direction. So just replicating what I said or what I did. And I found that to be problematic because it didn't leave space for other perspectives, new insight, or student innovation. This section was a reminder that as instructors, we must take intentional steps to decenter our aesthetic values, and including other resources that illustrate the content, not just our preference. Takeaway number 2 is epistemic exploitation. As mentioned before, this book has offered me a lot of vocabulary that helps me to express some things that I've experienced in my life, I've witnessed, but also now I am beginning to know things that I don't want to engage with. And epistemic exploitation is one of the terms that I was introduced to in this book. The writer explains, and I quote, "This not only diminishes the value of the expertise and the labor of the disenfranchised person, but also adds extra work the expert is not acknowledged for or compensated for," end quote. As a previous tenure line professor, this example really spoke to me because I am an American-born person that studies West African dance forms and whose course load many times includes West African dance. So here's another quote from the book. And the quote begins, "An example that illustrates and distinguishes epistemic exploitation from epistemic appropriation would be if I, as a cultural outsider, accepted a job teaching West African dance classes, epistemic appropriation, then asked a cultural insider, West African dance colleague to explain concepts of the dance forms to me for free," end quote. So in this example, and this term, the way I understand it is that someone from a disenfranchised community is asked to share their lived knowledge, their cultural wisdom, and maybe their not so great experiences for the benefit of educating the dominant culture, but with no benefit to the individual. Have you experienced this? Have you done this? And also, how do we avoid this? Let me know in the comments below, because I still am working through this. But here's what I do know. I do know that in my lived experience as a professor whose work was divided between teaching, service, and scholarship, I remember several conversations, none of which were led by administrators, where one colleague would ask another colleague to help with the lecture, and that tenure was kind of used as a carrot in that conversation, right? That promotion and tenure binder and that process was used as a carrot to kind of bring that other person in. And you would hear phrases like, oh, this would be a good hit on your ... or it will be a nice addition to your ... right? And I must also add that I don't think that any of these individuals at the time were doing anything malicious or underhanded. I do think that they were well-intended people, which is why I'm asking, how do we work around this, go through this? How do we avoid this moving forward? And in that idea of how do we avoid this moving forward, I have this question. How does colleague A compensate colleague B for the labor and the possible trauma that they are asking that person to revisit? I honestly think the solution is simple. Being very clear that easy and simple are not always the same thing. I do think there is a simple solution, and I do know that I need support with getting to that solution. So if you got any thoughts, drop them in the comments below, because we are moving on to takeaway number 3. Takeaway number 3 is contributory injustices. Here's a quote from the book. Try it again. Contributory injustices refers to a bias for certain resources that are deemed acceptable to cite, and thus often replicates the use of the dance canon, and by extension justifies that canon's presence in the dance curricula. As a student of dance forms that still rely heavily on oral traditions, this becomes problematic. This is problematic. I feel this is problematic because, as mentioned, my life as an educator, my life as a professor needs to include scholarship. Here's where the problem comes in. A number of my favorite and most in-depth sources are living, breathing people whose contributions to the dance world cannot be found in books and journals and papers that person wrote themselves. This does in no way or fashion diminish the impact that they have had on the dance world. At the same time, it does affect the acceptance of some of my submissions, as that thing, their work, because it lives in this space or is coming from this space, is not deemed as acceptable, or is considered outdated, or I wouldn't even necessarily say outdated. I would say that it's not deemed acceptable because of it's written, and therefore the sources that I have to lean into to pull from that are deemed acceptable, I feel at times are outdated and not culturally responsive to the work that I'm doing. So one of the things that I've begun to do, because we're thinking about how can we move forward, how can things be different from this moment right here going forward, is in my courses, I've begun to ask my students about their preferences and their habits around source materials, with the intention to make them aware of their preferences, just to make them aware of their preferences, but also offering them the option to share that preference with me or with the class if they're comfortable, because that also helps me to continue to curate this learning experience that we are having in the classes. I asked them questions like, what's your favorite way to receive information? Is it written? Is it listening? What's your favorite way to receive information? How do you decide which sources to use? I asked questions like, and what qualifies as a good source? But here's my question for you. Was this helpful? Was this entertaining? Was this insightful? Let me know in the comments below, or you could just drop an apple, like an apple for the teacher, in the comments below, just so that I know that you're here with me. Thank you for staying to the end. Again, my name is Maya D, and this has been 23 minutes. Stay blessed, spread a good word, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.